The boy in the yellow body warmer dances in front of the camera. He's high on drugs. In his hand, a plastic bottle holds the glue he's been sniffing all night. In the UK, a child his age would be at school studying for A-levels or Highers, but he's one of Zambia's many street children. For this homeless teenager, every day is a struggle for survival. Zambia is a landlocked country in sub-Saharan Africa and one of the poorest in the world. The average annual income is just $1,500, around 4% of the UK average. Life expectancy is less than 40 years, a tragic symptom of a country ravaged by HIV, with almost 15% of the population carrying the virus. Zambia's economic problems began in the 1970s when the prices for copper, their main export, slumped. To combat this deficit, the Zambian government borrowed heavily and by 2004 had debt totalling $7.1 billion. This was costing them $200 million a year to service, more than the country's entire budget for education. In 2005, against a backdrop of intense international pressure and global campaigns against third world poverty, world leaders met at the G8 summit in Scotland. They agreed to massive cancellation of debts owed by poor countries to the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank and the African Development Fund. It was a ray of hope for Zambia. But debt relief was not automatic, and countries that wanted to qualify for it had to demonstrate good financial management. For Zambia, this meant adjusting its financial policies and reducing public spending. I spoke to a spokesperson from the JCTR, an independent body which monitors debt and government spending, who explained how this affected the country's citizens.
We went through a phase of what you heard, the massive privatization, where government had to pull out from Zambia Congress of Copper Mining, which was largely run by the government. We had a lot of institutions, health institutions that were directly run by the government, a lot of education institutions that were directly run by the government, and the requirement was that a lot of these, begin to be privatized. You allow the private sector to run the institutions, so that government has less and less to do with that and begin to focus the attention on other issues of development. It meant that government, in an effort to build domestic stock, neglected its obligation to, for instance, paying the salaries for the teachers, for the nurses, and for a long period of time we had what we called the wage freeze and also the employment freeze, because government could not employ civil servants, because they had to build this stock and avoid employing teachers or nurses. So what that resulted into was that there was a huge outcry from the masses in the country that people could not send their children to school, people could not make their ends meet.
The cost of supporting the average family in the capital is around £378 a month, with the average salary at around £125. Most Zambians still live well below the poverty line. I asked why debt relief hadn't been the silver bullet for Zambia's financial problems.
It was done in a rush. It was a very complex reality that we thought was not properly handled and maybe needed a longer period of time to, kind of prepare the situation and the people for the transition.
I headed out of Lusaka into the country to one of the most impoverished areas in the region to see the situation for myself. Here in Chikundanu compound, a village to the west of Lusaka, life is not easy. Many of the families are struggling to survive. Looking around, it's hard to believe that debt relief has had any impact here. Some of the parents have sent their children to a local children's home, the Matunzi Centre, which provides them with the food, shelter and education that they can't get here. According to the people who live here, their main problem is a lack of education. They told me that in the past it was easy to get a job even if you hadn't completed your schooling, but that has changed, and these people now can't find work, so supporting their families is difficult. I spoke to one mother who has been forced to send 2 of her sons to live at a children's home. She told me of her hopes for her son Clement, pictured here in the purple football top.
Ndisha nifuna chamenecho ninga nkalicha benifuna pantawi ili yonse nchakuti ankale pabwino akasunge kwa anzake amene babwera mumbuya aba olukapena na ine kumozi anganisunge chifukwa kapezi kupusana eve uja mwana wanga.
For these children who remain in the village, the future is uncertain. Will there be food on the table tomorrow? Will they get to go to school? Who knows? But here, at this Lusaka children's shelter, the young residents know they will be fed and they will get an education. It's one of a number of centres in the area who look after street children and boys and girls from families living in abject poverty. The shelter's outreach officer is a former street child himself. He knows firsthand the reality for youngsters forced into homelessness.
Life on the street is real hell. I mean, the kids, it's really hard to be on the street. There's no security. Every day you have to wake up and think of what you are going to eat. Every day you have to think of where you are going to sleep. Yeah, there are no blankets on the street.
And what about, do they face violence or anything like that?
Oh yeah, that's normal on the street. Fighting is part of life, it's normal.
Why is there a need for places like Fountain of Hope in Lusaka and Zambia?
There are so many reasons why children go on the streets, but to mention a few, one of them is poverty. Because of poverty, children go up on the street.
Is that because their families can't afford to look
Can't
after them?
afford, yes, they can't afford to feed them. There are two types of children on the street. We have children off the street and children on the street. Children off the street are those who are there 24/7, and children on the street are just those who go there during the day and go back in the evenings. So because of poverty, you find that a 9-year-old child could go on the street and do some pieceworks, make a bit of money, go back home and buy food for the family. And also because of peer pressure, children ends up on the street. Maybe because of loss of parents, or even because of separation, divorce.
If they didn't come here, or to a centre like Fountain of Hope, what would be their future? What could they expect?
They can be robbers, thieves. They can just try by all means to earn their living. They involve themselves in drugs and then they start stealing, attacking people. Then they grow up to be very dangerous criminals.
The huge number of beds crammed into the dormitory gives an indication of the scale of the country's issue with street children. The personal items the boys sleeping here put on display show that, whatever their problems, their interests aren't so different from British children. In spite of their chaotic pasts, they can be seen eagerly getting down to schoolwork, an opportunity they wouldn't have without this place. The centre also has a library on site to help improve literacy levels, as well as art facilities. A welcome creative outlet for children whose lives have been blighted with unimaginable trauma. A place at the centre will hopefully mean these youngsters are not destined for a life on the streets. But for many Zambians, that kind of existence is an everyday reality. Severino invited me to go out onto the streets of Lusaka to see the situation for myself. It was a Friday night, so we headed to an area near to bars and nightclubs where he knew the homeless would be congregating, hoping to make some money from the clubbers in the area. It wasn't long before we were surrounded by a large group of boys, all keen to tell me about the problems that had led to them living on the streets. Most of these boys are in their late teens and early 20s, but the boy you can see peeking out at the camera here is just 12 years old. One young man told me how his life had changed for the worse.
My mother passed away. My mother passed away, and my father's relatives neglected me.
And how is life on the street? Are you happy to be on the street?
No, I'm not happy.
Why?
I'm not happy because in the street I hardly eat. I don't have anything to do anything.
Oh.
How do you make money?
How do I make money? Like in the night, like this time night, I come here to look after cars, but during the day, I wash cars.
Throughout our conversation, he openly sniffed on a drug-soaked rag. We asked him to tell us about it.
And what is this?
It's sticker.
And what is a sticker?
Sticker is smoking for when you are feeling cold. When you are feeling cold, you get high. You can't feel even any cold.
While the boys had seemed friendly at the start, we were suddenly forced to leave when my cameraman heard them talking about stealing our equipment. It felt like a depressing end to an eye-opening encounter. But Severino knows from personal experience that becoming career criminals is not inevitable for boys like these.
When I look at myself, when I look at my friends, the way we were a couple of years ago, no, there was no hope in us. but there's hope in these children, and everyone can change. And I see ministers, I see responsible people in these kids. So there's hope in life. They've got a bright future. There's always the light by the end of the tunnel.
Some boys play as the sun sets over Zambia. How bright will their futures be? Poverty levels here have dropped from 80% to 64% since 2006, but that means that most people are still struggling to survive. The only thing that's certain is that debt relief has been no quick fix for Zambia's poorest people.